In this video, we're going to take a quick look at the hyper-accelerated dragon, which is what I play against e4. And we're going to start off with c5. This is the Sicilian defense with an early attack on the d4 square. So we're trying to gain control of that d4 square. And here, if they play knight f3, that's a sign that they're probably going to go for an open game. They may follow up with d4 after our next move and try to open the game up. And here I help incentivize that idea with g6, two pawn moves. So I've yet to develop a piece. But we can see my idea here is, or the idea, to have a bishop on g7, and maybe our knight would go to c6 with an attack on d4, and then our pawn, our c pawn, would also be working on the d4 square. So our strategy here is revolving around early control of the d4 square. In addition to that, we want to, if they open the position up with an early d4, if they move their pawn to d4, we're going to exchange. And that'll give us control of the, or at least give us a half open file where we're going to place a rook later on. So if they play d4, let's take a look at that on move 3 here. We're going to trade. A c pawn is worth a little bit less than a d pawn. And it fits in with our strategy of opening up the long diagonal for our bishop and opening up the c file for a rook later on. So we're going to take. And now they can take back with the queen or the knight. Taking back with the knight is a better move. The queen is a little tactical, and we'll look at that later on. So knight takes d4. And there are several ways to play it here. You could go ahead and bring your bishop out to g7. But the way I play it is I bring the knight out to c6 first. And the reason I play this way is because my repertoire right now is coming from a book called Chess Openings for Black Explained. And we bring the knights out first in situations where they play their c pawn to c4, which is a setup known as the Maroczy bind. And because of that reason, I need to stay a little bit flexible with the idea of bringing the knights out first because of the way we're playing against the Maroczy bind. So that'll become clearer once we start looking at those lines. So here, let's say they play knight c3, just shoring up their e-pawn, developing another minor piece. Bishop g7, and now all of a sudden, white has an issue. The knight on d4 is under attack. And if it were my move now, I would capture that knight and win it. So they need to do something about it. They can retreat the knight. They can exchange their d-knight with our knight on c6, giving up a central knight for a knight that's on c6 is probably not a good idea for them. A centralized knight is very powerful, so they wouldn't want to just give that up without getting something in return. So probably their best move, and the one that's played most frequently, is bishop e3, bringing out another minor piece and defending against the threat of capturing the d4 knight and winning it. Knight f6 is what I normally play here, and just putting some pressure on the e-pawn. And this kind of has the idea of, if it prevents the c3 knight from moving anywhere right now, he's kind of stuck there because he's defending the pawn. So he's going to have to do something to defend that pawn further, or keep the knight on c3, which is typically what they do. Here, bishop c4 is probably white's best move, bringing out another minor piece, and now he's going to be ready to castle on his next move if he wants. And so I'll castle here. And by the way, if white were to castle now, it's really not their best move. Typically, you'll see bishop to b3 played here. Now you might wonder why. That doesn't make sense. You move the bishop twice in the opening, so let's back up. Let's say they castle instead. All right. That allows black to sacrifice on e4. And if white captures here, then we can play d5 with an attack on both the knight on e4 and the bishop on c4. Probably they'll want to hold on to their bishop. So we'd take the knight. And in fact, what normally happens, let's back up here. Before they move the bishop, a lot of times they'll capture this knight first, attacking the queen. So we take back with a pawn. And now these two pawns are very strong right now, so we still have our fork. So then they would retreat the bishop. Take the knight. Bishop takes on e4. And now there's an attack on the c-pawn. So, and we also have an attack on their b-pawn. But not to get distracted here, we need to develop another minor piece to finish our development. So bishop to a6 makes sense with an attack on their rook. So probably they're going to move the rook. Now, if they chose to capture the c-pawn here, attacking our rook, you can simply slide the rook over, attacking their bishop. And now their bishop's under attack and their rook is under attack. So they have two problems now. And so, I mean, if they pulled a stunt like bringing the bishop to d7, then you can just slide the rook up here. And now you're attacking the bishop twice. So he's going to have to move or you're going to win it, in which case you would take the rook down on f1. So he's got a bunch of problems now. So let's back up for a moment and get out of all of this. Let's see here. So when that happens, let's see here. Let's say they bring the bishop here, or let's say they take here, we take, they bring the bishop here. Bishop comes here on e4. Our bishop goes to a6, attacking the rook. And so now, instead of bishop takes pawn on c6, their best move is to slide the rook out of the line of fire here to e1. And then the game would continue from this point. So from this position, the material is even. And white really doesn't have anything much to show for their position. You know, they've got a pawn on b2, which is under attack. And so things are looking pretty good for black. So this is an equal position. And so that's why. So let's back up. On move 8, white normally doesn't castle here. They normally bring the bishop back to b3. Now, if they castle on move 8 and we play knight takes e4, besides playing knight takes e4, they also have the option of capturing on f7 check, in which case we recapture with the rook, of course, and then taking the knight. And now they've traded a bishop for a knight. Material is even, and we can bring our queen out to a5 now, which is a nice position for black. And so here, let me just draw a few lines here. We've got a bishop. We have a well-developed queen. We have two central pawns. And we also have a knight that's in play here. So this is a very good position for black. Probably this is an equal position, maybe even slightly better for black. And if white were to capture our knight, simply capture in towards the center. And now these three pawns are going to become very strong and mobile. So you notice that white still has his two central pawns, the D pawn and the E pawn. I mean, black doesn't, but white does not. So this is very good for black. And having that our dark square bishop open the way it is also very good for black. And later on, we're going to be able to bring our rook over to the B file and giving him access here. And this bishop can come out to A6, giving him some good activity along the A6 F1 diagonal. So let's get out of all that. So let's go back after bishop c4, where black castled here. And that's why white does not castle on move 8. Instead, he'll play a move like bishop b3. And that eliminates the little fork trick with the where our knight captures on e4, and then we push the d pawn. So after bishop b3, we're going to play a5 here. And the idea here is the a5 move later in the game helps us in some cases to play our d pawn all the way to d5 in one move. And but we're not going to look at that in this one particular run here. So, and the way it would do that, by the way, just briefly, in some cases we would sacrifice our flank pawn, the a pawn, for either the bishop on b3 or the knight on c3, giving us, because both of those pieces are working on our d5 square. And there are cases where we'd want to push our pawn, our d pawn, to d5 and sidetrack or distract one of the defenders of the d5 square, which is either the bishop on b3 or the knight on c3. We would want one of them to be distracted long enough for us to get some activity in the center of the board. So that's kind of what's going on here. Now, to stop all that, white may make a move like a4 here. And now we're not going to be able to make any further progress with our a pawn. But that causes a structural issue for white on their queen side. The bishop on b3 is now defended only by the c pawn. And so in this position, we can sacrifice our f6 knight to equalize the game, or even in some cases gain an advantage. So we can put our knight on g4, and the idea is let me see here. This knight is attacking the bishop on e3. And after capturing that bishop, we would be attacking the queen. So the idea here is if white were to take our knight and attack our queen, since we're moving first, we would be taking their queen, and they take our queen, and then we recapture, they recapture. And it works out really well for us. But you may see just simply queen takes g4. That's probably white's best move here. And then we're going to play knight takes d4. And the idea is that now black is ready to capture the bishop on b3. And he doesn't need to do it right away. I mean, he typically waits until he's forced to do it. Because in this position, the b3 bishop cannot leave its post. It's actually defending the c2 pawn right now. And so it can't move away from the square. So we're going to capture on b3 at our convenience, really. So let's see here. Now the queen, white's queen, there's an issue in its current location. Once our d pawn moves, it's going to be exposed to attack. So it's probably going to want to move somewhere. Now, in this particular game, the queen went to h4, just kind of hoping to hang around the king's side of the board and maybe get an attack on our king. But if the queen were to retreat, let's say white were to take their queen back to d1, well, we see now white has two attackers on our knight. And black's got only one defender. In addition to that, the queen on d1 now defends the c pawn, which means that the bishop sitting on b3 can move away. So probably the best idea here is to go ahead and capture the bishop on b3. And this causes a structural problem for white. White has 3 pawns on the queen side. The b file has double pawns. And we have 2 pawns on the queen side. So our 2 pawns on the queen side in an endgame would be able to hold white's 3 pawns on that side. And the fact that we have an extra central pawn, let me get something else to draw with here. The fact that we have an extra central pawn means that in the endgame, after the bishops or maybe maybe the rooks and the queens would be traded off, and maybe there's just a bishop and maybe a knight on the board or something like that. We would be able to centralize our king, and they're going to do the same, and probably force through a central pawn. And that pawn being active is going to require some defensive measures by our opponent. And while that happens, the white king and maybe his bishop or his knight, whatever's left, would be distracted. Hopefully he's going to be left with a knight. And that distraction will enable our king to do something else and possibly force a pawn through to become a queen. So that's kind of a long-term goal here. So let's back up. So let's say they play queen to h4 here instead of coming back to d1. So here, just the move d6 looks good. And I like that move because it develops our light square bishop. And knight d5 was played. With an attack on the e-pawn. Now moving the e-pawn might not be the best move here. Probably because, I mean, we just moved the d-pawn to release our c8 bishop. And so moving the e-pawn kind of, I mean, that kind of reverses the idea of moving the d-pawn in the first place to release the bishop. So you don't want to release the bishop and then close it back in with another pawn move. So probably a stronger move, a better move would be something like rook to e8, just defending the pawn, bringing the rook towards the center. So you're improving your position here. So then rook d1 was played. Now, all of a sudden, we have an issue. Our knight is being attacked twice. And defended once. So remember, we want to capture this bishop on, let me mark it real quick. We want to capture this bishop on b3. So now's the time to do it. So the movement of that rook to d1 is our signal to simply capture. Knight takes b3. And so what we're actually doing here is devaluing the queenside pawns for white, making them less effective. Now, white could take the knight right away, and we got what we wanted, and we'll continue with our development, probably bringing our bishop out to e6 next. Or let's back up a second. After we take this bishop on b3, white has an option to go in for some tactics here. With bishop to b6. Attacking our queen. So queen d7, it's the only move. And the idea here is to bring their knight to c7 with a fork on our rooks. But if they were to do that now, let's say they brought the knight in now. I think you can get away with this move here. Knight d4. And now if they capture, say knight takes a8. Knight takes c2 check. It's got to move the king. King to f1. Queen takes a4. And now there's a threat here. We're threatening to move the knight away with check and with an attack on the d1 rook. And so let's say they come back, knight c7, ignoring that. Knight e3 check. And if they capture the knight, then we get the rook. He has to bring the queen back. Capture, capture. And then just simply rook to f8. And black has an advantage here. So let's back up a little bit. So right here on this position. So let's say instead of taking with the pawn, let's say he takes with the bishop. Well, then that's checkmate. So that's no good. So you see white can get into a lot of trouble if they let our knight escape. And so that's why, let's back up on all of this. So that's why in this position, they don't play knight to c7. Instead, they'll go ahead and capture the knight on b3. And then I like this move, rook a6. So if the knight were to come to, let's see what I got here. If the knight were to come to c7 now, we simply take the bishop. And then we've gotten two minor pieces for a rook, which is good for black. So let's back up. So that's why in this position, instead of bringing the knight to c7, see after we played a rook to a6, they'll probably do the wise thing here and just retreat. Forget the whole idea. Bishop back to d4. And then what Vladimir Kramnik did in this position, and I agree with him, is he played his queen back to d8. Getting back to the business of getting on with his development. And so now, both the queen and the rook are covering the b6 square. So we can't have any more of that nonsense on b6 with the knight, with the bishop coming into b6 and then the knight coming down. And the queen has gotten out of the way of our light square bishop. Once again, able to come out and be active. So let's say white were to castle here. Bishop b6 is good. And maybe bishop takes g7. You know, they always like to get rid of that bishop. Our fianchettoed bishop. King takes g7. So our king comes up. And notice that the king is defending the dark squares around the castled position that our bishop on g7 was defending before it was exchanged. Knight f4. With an attack on our bishop. And so you have a choice here. You can Maybe play bishop takes b3 here, pick up a pawn or two. Or the way Kramnik played it is what did he do here? That's what he played, queen to c8. So he wouldn't get double pawns if the knight were to capture. And then he continued with, let's see here, white played rook d3, Kramnik went rook c6, queen g3, f6, rook c3 was played, and then bishop went to f7. And I think Black's idea here is he's going to trade queens and rooks and take the position down into an endgame with a bishop against a knight. And then Black's going to use the extra central pawn to get a pass pawn, as I was discussing earlier. And that's a winning strategy.